The house was once the pride of the whole town. It stood on a wide piece of land, with tall gates, long balconies, and walls that used to shine under the sun. Years ago, people slowed their cars just to look at it. Some dreamed of living there one day. Others spoke about the man inside with respect. He had built his life from nothing, or so people believed. And the mansion was proof that hard work could change a person's fate. But time has a strange way of changing how things look. The gates were now rusted and stuck halfway open. Paint peeled off the walls like old skin. One balcony railing leaned forward, as if it might fall at any moment. Weeds grew where flowers once bloomed. Broken glass lay hidden in the grass. Anyone passing by could tell the house was no longer loved. The man still lived there every morning. He woke up before sunrise, not because he had somewhere to go, but because his body was used to discipline. He brewed his own tea, always the same way, even though the kitchen ceiling had stains from years of leaks. He sat at the small table near the window, looking out at the yard that no longer felt like his own. He didn't complain. He didn't curse his luck. He simply accepted the silence. The neighbors talked. They talked when he walked out to collect the mail, wearing the same faded jacket he had owned for years. They talked when he fixed a broken step himself, instead of hiring help. They talked when they saw no visitors during holidays. To them, the story was simple. He had lost everything. The big house was just an empty shell, and he was too proud or too foolish to let go. What they talked about most, though, was his failed marriage she had left on a bright afternoon. Her car packed full, her face calm and certain. She didn't cry. She didn't look back. People remembered how she laughed with her friends later that week, joking about how she had escaped a man who could not even save his own home. She told them the mansion was nothing but a broken dream, just like the man who refused to leave it. Her words spread fast. Soon, laughter followed his name. Not loud laughter, but the kind that comes with shaking heads and quiet judgment. People said he deserved it. Others said it was sad but expected. In this town, success was admired. But failure was never forgiven. He never responded. When someone asked him why he didn't sell the house, he simply said it wasn't time. When someone hinted that his ex had moved on to a better life, he nodded politely and changed the subject. He did not defend himself, even when lies grew bigger than the truth. His silence made people believe he had nothing left to protect. Inside the mansion, many rooms were locked. Dust covered the floors in places no one walked anymore. Furniture was covered with old sheets. The air smelled of age and quiet. But there was one room that told a different story. It was small, once meant to be a guest bedroom. The walls were freshly painted. A simple desk stood near the window. Papers were neatly stacked. A single lamp gave warm light at night. This was where he spent most of his time. Late at night, while the rest of the town slept, the light from that window stayed on. From the road it looked lonely, almost pitiful. Some neighbors assumed he was staring at old photos, regretting his choices. Others believed he was simply unable to accept reality. None of them imagined that the broken look of the house was exactly how he wanted it to be. Years earlier, when his business first started to shake, he saw what others didn't. He noticed patterns. Changes in markets, small signs that something bigger was coming. While others rushed to protect appearances, he chose something different. He let go of comfort before it was taken from him. He made decisions quietly, without explaining them to anyone, not even to the woman he was married to at the time. That silence cost him his marriage. She wanted answers. She wanted reassurance. She wanted proof that their life was still secure. When he refused to explain his choices, fear turned into anger. Anger turned into distance. Distance became an exit. He watched her leave without stopping her, not because he didn't care, but because he knew words would only make things worse. He had learned long ago that some paths must be walked alone, no matter how heavy they feel, after she left. The mansion changed faster than his life did. Repairs stopped. Projects were left unfinished. He could have fixed everything, but he didn't. Every crack, every broken tile, Every peeling wall served a purpose. The house became a shield. It kept curiosity away. It kept attention off him. People stopped asking questions. Occasionally, unfamiliar cars appeared late at night. They parked briefly and left before morning. Anyone who noticed assumed the worst. Some thought he was borrowing money. Others thought he was involved in shady deals. These rumors suited him just fine. What he was really doing required patience. It required long nights, careful planning, and trust in decisions that would not pay off quickly. The world he worked in did not reward loud success. It rewarded those who could wait. He learned to live with less. Meals were simple. Clothes were worn but clean. He fixed what he could with his own hands. Each small repair reminded him that strength was not about how things looked, how long they could last. The town moved on. New businesses opened. New faces arrived. His story became an example parents used to warn their children about pride and risk. "Don't end up like him," they said, pointing toward the broken mansion. He heard those words once while standing in line at a small shop. The person didn't recognize him. He paid for his items and walked out without reacting. Outside he paused, looked up at the sky, and allowed himself one slow breath. He knew the truth, and he knew that truth had its own timing. The mansion creaked at night when the wind blew through its damaged parts. To anyone else, the sound would have been unsettling. To him, it was familiar. It reminded him that even broken things could still stand. He sat at his desk, reading, planning, calculating. Every move he made was quiet, careful, and invisible. The world thought his story was already over. It was only beginning. The days passed slowly. The town almost forgot about him, except when they needed an example of what failure looked like. The broken mansion still stood there, quiet and heavy, like it was holding its breath. People drove past it every day, barely noticing it anymore. To them, it had become part of the background. Just another old structure waiting to collapse. For him, every day followed a pattern. He woke early, cleaned the small space he lived in, and checked his notes. He wrote things down with a pen, not a computer, because it helped him think clearly. Numbers, dates, small reminders. Nothing fancy, just what mattered. He moved with care, not rushing anything. Rushing had ruined many people he once knew. Sometimes he stood near the window and watched people pass by. Families walking their children to school, couples arguing quietly, old men sitting on benches talking about how life used to be better. None of them paid attention to him anymore. And that was exactly how he wanted it. His ex continued to talk. She had built a new life for herself. A smaller house, but newer. A circle of friends who liked to gossip and laugh. Whenever his name came up, she shook her head with a smile that carried both pride and bitterness. She told them he was stubborn, weak, and trapped in the past. She said the mansion was falling apart because it touched his mind. Her laughter traveled far. It reached people who never met him. People who only knew the story through her words. Over time, her version became the truth everyone accepted. No one questioned it. No one bothered to ask him. He heard about her words through others. A shop owner mentioned it casually. A distant relative hinted at it during a phone call. Each time he listened without reaction. When the conversation ended, he returned to his work. He understood something many people didn't. Defending yourself rarely changes minds that are already closed. The mansion continued to age. Rain leaked through the roof in one hallway. He placed buckets there, emptying them when needed. A door no longer closed properly. He left it that way. The outside told a story he allowed the world to believe. Inside, the important things stayed protected. Late one night, a car stopped outside. Its lights were turned off quickly. A man stepped out, looking around before knocking softly at the side door. This wasn't unusual. These visits happened once in a while, always brief, always quiet. He opened the door and let the man inside without speaking. They sat in a small room with a desk. Papers were spread out. Numbers were checked. Decisions were confirmed. No one raised their voice. No one showed excitement. When the meeting ended, the visitor nodded with respect and left the same way he came. From the outside, it looked like nothing had happened. The neighbors who noticed the car assumed it meant trouble. One woman whispered that he must be borrowing money again. Another said he was surely desperate by now. Their assumptions made him invisible. That invisibility protected him better than any guard. There were moments, though, when the weight felt heavy. At night, where the mansion was silent, memories surfaced. He remembered laughter echoing through the halls. He remembered shared meals, plans spoken with confidence, in a future that once felt certain. Losing those things hurt more than losing money ever did, but regret did not control him. He reminded himself why he chose this path. Years ago, when warning signs appeared, he had tried to explain his concerns. Not in detail, but enough to show caution. He was met with impatience. People wanted comfort, not honesty. They wanted proof, not patience. So he stopped explaining. That decision cost him relationships. Friends faded away. Calls stopped coming. Invitations disappeared. He watched it happen without chasing anyone. He knew that staying true to his judgment meant standing alone for a while. The town held an event one afternoon. Music played. Food stalls lined the street. People gathered and laughed. He walked through quietly, unnoticed. Someone pointed toward the broken mansion in the distance and made a joke. A few people laughed. He kept walking, carrying a small bag of groceries. No one recognized him. That moment stayed with him longer than he expected. Not because it hurt his pride, but because it showed how quickly the world moves on. He realized that public opinion was fragile. It changed direction easily. Depending on it was dangerous. Back at the mansion, sat down and reviewed his progress. What he was building could not be rushed. It depended on timing, trust, and silence. He had chosen investments that didn't make headlines. He avoided attention. Every step was slow, but steady. He thought about leaving. Many times. Considered selling the mansion and starting somewhere new. A simpler place. Fewer memories. But each time, he reached the same conclusion. Leaving now would expose things too early. The broken house kept questions away, so he stayed. The seasons changed. Summer heat cracked more paint. Winter rain worsened the leaks. He adapted. He learned which parts of the house were safe and which were best left alone. The mansion became like a living thing, aging alongside him. One afternoon, a letter arrived. It was from his ex. Short and sharp. She reminded him that the house was an embarrassment. She suggested he sell it before it collapsed completely. She ended the letter with a line that felt more like a warning than concern. He folded the paper and placed it in a drawer. There was no anger, no urge to reply. He understood her fear. She believed she had escaped failure. Seeing him still standing, even in ruin, unsettled her that night. He worked later than usual. The lamp stayed on until early morning. He reviewed figures again and again, making sure nothing was left to chance. The path he walked was narrow, and mistakes would be costly. As dawn approached, he leaned back in his chair and allowed himself a small smile, not because he had one, anything yet, but because he could see the road ahead. More clearly than ever, the town still believed. His story was finished. They were wrong, and soon. The silence surrounding the broken mansion would begin to crack. By the third year, the broken mansion had become a joke people no longer laughed hard at. It was more like a quiet reminder of what happens when someone falls too far. Children dared each other to walk past it at night. Adults shook their heads and said it should be torn down. No one imagined anything valuable still lived inside those walls. He noticed how invisible he had become at first. That invisibility felt strange. When you are used to being seen, respected, and listened to, silence can feel like punishment. But over time, he understood its power. No one watched his steps anymore. No one measured his progress. He could move freely, unnoticed. Inside the mansion, the small room remained alive. The desk was worn but steady. Papers had grown into careful stacks. Some were old records. Others were recent notes. He kept everything organized in his own way. Not perfect, but clear enough for him to understand. The rest of the house stayed dark, as if frozen in time. His work was no longer about survival in the beginning. He'd focused only on staying afloat, avoiding losses, protecting what little he had left. But now the shape of something bigger was forming. It was slow and quiet, but real. He could feel it in the way numbers aligned and how plans began to connect. He had learned to trust patience. Many people believe success comes from bold moves and loud confidence. He knew better. True growth often happens where no one is looking. While others chased fast wins, he waited. While others showed off, he stayed silent. One evening, a storm hit the town. Rain poured hard, and wind shook the mansion like it was testing its strength. Water leaked through weak spots in the roof. He placed extra buckets and moved papers to safety. The storm lasted hours, but the house held, as thunder echoed. Memories returned. He remembered the early days of his success, the long nights, the risk, the excitement. He remembered people praising him, asking for advice, wanting to be close. Back then, attention felt good. Now, he understood its cost. After the storm passed, he stepped outside. The yard was a mess. Branches lay scattered. Mud covered the path. He stood there quietly, breathing in the cool air. The mansion looked worse than ever, but it was still standing. That felt familiar. A few days later, a stranger approached him in town. The man was polite, cautious. He asked simple questions about the property, about the land, about whether it might ever be for sale. His tone was casual, but his interest was clear. He answered carefully. He said the house was old. He said he had no plans to sell. He said little else. The stranger nodded and left, but not before glancing back at him with curiosity. That moment mattered. It told him what he already suspected. Things were changing. Slowly, quietly, just like everything else. News traveled in small pieces. A road expansion was being discussed. A development plan mentioned nearby areas. Nothing was confirmed, but whispers had started. Most people ignored them. He didn't. That night, he reviewed maps and old documents. He checked dates, compared notes, confirmed positions. The mansion stood in a place most people overlooked, but planners could not ignore forever. He had seen this coming years ago. This was why he stayed. The house was not just a shelter. It was a position, a quiet one. Meanwhile, his ex continued her life. She shared pictures of dinners, trips, and gatherings. Her laughter was louder now, more confident. When someone mentioned the broken mansion, she smiled like she had made the smartest decision of her life. Yet sometimes, late at night, doubt crept in. She wondered how he managed to survive for so long without help. She wondered why he never asked for support. She pushed those thoughts away. It was easier to believe he was simply stuck. Back at the mansion, he faced his own doubts. There were nights when exhaustion weighed heavy, when silence felt too deep, when he questioned whether patience would truly pay off. But each time, he returned to the same truth. Rushing would ruin everything. He reminded himself that storms always reveal weak foundations. Many, who once looked successful, were now struggling. Businesses closed. Investments failed. People who mocked him quietly disappeared from public view. He noticed these things without joy or bitterness. He didn't feel superior. He felt prepared. Another late-night visit came. This time, 2 people arrived. Their conversation was longer, more detailed. Papers were signed. Hands were shaken. When they left, the night felt different, lighter. He sat alone afterward, thinking what he was building was no longer fragile. It had reached a stage where outside forces could not easily break it. The hardest part was already behind him. Outside, the mansion creaked softly. The sound no longer bothered him. It felt like a companion that had shared his silence. He stood by the window and looked out at the dark street. No, one looked back. That was fine. The truth was still hidden. But not for much longer. The broken mansion had done its job. Soon, The same place people mocked would force them to look again. And when they did, they would realize how wrong they had been. Change never arrives with noise at first. It slips in quietly, almost politely, and waits to be noticed. For a long time, the town had ignored the broken mansion. Now, without realizing it, people were starting to look again. It began with small signs. Surveyors appeared near the main road, placing markers and taking measurements. A few trucks stopped nearby, their drivers studying maps before moving on. Conversations in shops slowly shifted. Words like development, expansion, future plans floated through the air. Most people didn't connect these signs to the broken mansion to them. It was still just an old house falling apart. A place with no value except as a warning story. They assumed progress would go around it, not through it. He noticed everything. From his small room, he followed updates carefully. He read public notices. He listened when people talked freely, not knowing who he was. He compared new information with the plans he had made years earlier. Each detail confirmed what he already knew. The timing was close. One afternoon, a letter arrived with an official stamp. He opened it slowly, reading each line twice. It was polite, careful, and vague. It spoke about interest in the area and future possibilities. It asked whether he would be open to discussion. He folded the letter and placed it beside others like it. This was not the first. Weeks later, another followed, then another. Each one came from a different office, a different group, a different voice. Together, they formed a pattern that could no longer be ignored. The town started to feel uneasy. People who once joked about the mansion now wondered why no one had bought it yet. They asked questions. Some searched public records. Others whispered that maybe the land itself was valuable. The broken house was no longer invisible. His ex heard the rumors too. At first, she laughed them off. She told her friends that people were overthinking. She insisted the house was still worthless. But the laughter felt forced now. A crack had formed in her certainty. One evening, she drove past the mansion for the first time in years. She slowed down without meaning to. The place looked worse than she remembered. Dark, tired, forgotten. Yet something about it felt steady, like it was waiting. That feeling unsettled her. Inside the mansion, he continued his routine. He did not rush. He did not respond to every message. He chose carefully who to speak with and when. Power, he had learned, was not in reacting quickly. It was in holding your ground until the moment was right. Late-night visits became slightly more frequent. Still quiet. Still respectful. But the conversations had changed. There was more certainty now. More confidence. Less risk. He noticed the shift and allowed himself a moment of reflection. Everything he had endured had led to this stage. The loneliness, the judgment, the silence. None of it had been wasted. Outside, opinions were changing. A local paper mentioned the area in a small article. It didn't name him directly, but it didn't need to. Those who knew understood. Curiosity grew. Some people felt uncomfortable. They remembered the jokes they had made, the assumptions they had shared. Regret began to creep in, quiet and heavy. One afternoon, someone knocked on the front gate. It was a former friend. Someone who had disappeared years ago. The conversation was awkward, polite, careful. The friend spoke about old times and slowly hinted at opportunities. He listened without bitterness. When the conversation ended, nothing was promised. Nothing was shared. The gate closed gently. That visit told him everything he needed to know. People were starting to return, not out of care. But out of interest, he stayed calm. The past had taught him not to confuse attention with loyalty. His ex finally reached out. The message was short, friendly, almost casual. She asked how he was doing. She mentioned the rumors lightly, as if they meant nothing. He read the message once and set the phone down. He did not reply, not out of anger, not out of pride, but because some conversations lose their meaning once time has passed. Days later, official meetings began. People who once overlooked him now sat across from him, serious and respectful. Papers were reviewed. Numbers were discussed. Options were considered. The broken mansion stood quietly during it all. No repairs were made. No walls were painted. It remained exactly as it was, a reminder of how appearances can lie. Word spread quickly now. The same town that once pitied him now spoke his name with caution. Some with admiration, others with disbelief. He felt none of it deeply. What mattered was that his patience had protected him. One evening, he stood in the yard as the sun went down. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine life beyond the mansion. Not with excitement, but with calm certainty. The world was finally catching up to what he had known all along. The truth was no longer hidden. It was simply waiting to be accepted. The final change came without celebration. No loud announcement. No sudden crowd at the gates. Just a quiet shift that felt heavier than noise ever could. Early one morning, black cars arrived and parked neatly along the road. People noticed. Curtains moved. Phones came out. The same neighbors who once avoided looking at the mansion now stood still. Watching, he stepped outside calmly. He wore simple clothes, nothing new, nothing flashy. His face showed no excitement, only focus. He greeted the visitors politely and led them inside, not through the main entrance, but through the side door he had used for years. Inside, decisions were finalized, documents were signed. Numbers were confirmed. Every detail that had been planned in silence was now placed into clear words. The broken mansion, the land beneath it, and the future surrounding it were no longer rumors. They were facts. By noon, the truth had spread. The property was not worthless. It had never been. The value hidden beneath the decay was far greater than anyone imagined. What looked like failure had been patience. What looked like stubbornness had been strategy. The town reacted in waves. First came disbelief, then curiosity, then quiet embarrassment. People remembered their words, their jokes, their certainty that his life was over. Some felt shame. Others tried to rewrite history, claiming they had always believed in him. He heard these things without reaction. He had learned long ago that people speak differently once the outcome is clear. His ex heard the news in the evening. This time, there was no laughter. She sat alone, reading the same details again and again, hoping she had misunderstood. But the truth was solid. The man she had mocked, the house she had called broken, were now symbols of something she could not reach. She tried to call him. The phone rang until it stopped. She sent a message, then another. Friendly words. Apologies hidden inside casual sentences. He read them once and placed the phone face down. He did not feel anger. He felt distance. That distance had grown naturally over time, shaped by silence and choice. Some bridges fall not because they are burned, but because no one walks on them anymore. The following days were busy. Officials returned. Plans were drawn. The future of the area was discussed openly now. The broken mansion stood at the center of it all, calm and unchanged. People came to see it. They stood outside, pointing at cracks and faded walls, struggling to understand how they had missed the truth for so long. The house had not changed. Their understanding had. He watched from a distance. For years, he had lived inside their assumptions. Now, he stepped out of them without making a sound. One afternoon, he walked through the mansion slowly. He touched the walls, the door frames, the places where life once echoed loudly. He felt gratitude, not sadness. This house had protected him when nothing else could. Soon, it would be gone. Not destroyed, but transformed. When the final agreement was completed, he did not stay to watch the reaction. He packed his belongings quietly. The desk, the papers, the lamp that had guided him through long nights. He left before sunrise. No. One saw him go. The town woke up to an empty house for the first time in years. It stood there, still broken, still silent, but no longer carrying his story. Weeks later, people spoke of him differently, with respect, with curiosity, sometimes with regret. He never returned to correct them. He had moved on to a life that did not depend on being understood. He invested in projects that helped others rebuild quietly, without attention. He chose places where silence was valued. As for his ex, she eventually stopped calling. She learned that some losses cannot be fixed with apologies. The lesson stayed with her longer than any regret. The broken mansion was finally taken down months later. In its place, something new rose. People admired it, took pictures, and spoke proudly of progress. Few remembered what once stood there, but the lesson remained. Not every broken thing is weak. Not every quiet man is defeated. And sometimes, the greatest success belongs to those who are willing to let the world believe they have already lost. Life after the mansion moved slowly, the way real life often does after something big ends. There was no sudden joy, no dramatic relief. Just a quiet morning, then another, and then many more. He woke up in a small rented place far from the town. It had plain walls, clean windows, and no history tied to it. That was exactly why he chose it. Nothing there reminded him of who he used to be or what people once thought of him. He kept his routine. Early mornings, simple meals, careful planning. He still wrote things down with a pen. He still believed that speed ruined good judgment. Wealth had not changed his habits. If anything, it had confirmed them. People tried to find him. Some came with praise, others with regret, a few with hidden hopes of benefit. He answered politely when needed and stayed silent when silence felt right. He had learned that not every door needed to be opened. Even if knocking grew louder, the projects he chose were quiet ones, old buildings that needed patience. Small businesses run by tired people who only needed time and support. He never put his face on anything. He avoided headlines. He let others take credit when credit helped them stand taller. That brought him peace. At night, sometimes thought about the mansion, not with sadness, but with understanding. It had been a teacher. It showed him how easily people confuse appearance with truth, how quickly laughter replaces respect, how silence can be both a shield and a test. One evening, he returned to the town without telling anyone. The place had changed. New roads, new lights, new buildings. People walked faster now, focused on their own futures. Very few remembered the broken house that once stood there. He stood at the edge of the area, where it used to be. Nothing marked the past. He stayed only a few minutes, then left. Some stories are meant to end quietly. Months passed. He grew older, calmer, more selective. He allowed himself small joys, morning walks, long conversations with thoughtful people, evenings without plans. From time to time, he heard echoes of his old story. People spoke of the mansion as a lesson, others as a rumor. Some got details wrong. He never corrected them. Truth does not always need defense. His ex eventually built a different life. Not better, not worse, just different. She carried her own lessons, though she rarely spoke of them. Regret softened over time into quiet acceptance. She learned that laughter can cost more than tears. He wished her well from a distance. Not everyone who leaves is an enemy. Years later, someone asked him once why he stayed silent for so long. He thought carefully before answering. He said that some victories lose their meaning when explained too early. Some paths only work if walked alone. And sometimes letting people believe the wrong story is the safest choice you can make. The person nodded, unsure if they fully understood. That was fine. Understanding often comes late, if at all. As time went on, his life became simpler in ways money could not buy. He trusted himself. He no longer needed approval. He no longer feared loss, because he had already lived through it in the end. The broken mansion was never about wealth. It was about patience. It was about silence. It was about knowing who you are when no one is watching. And that lesson stayed with him longer than any building ever could. Time did not rush him, and he did not rush time. After everything that had happened, life settled into a quiet rhythm that felt earned, not given. He no longer measured days by profit or progress. He measured them by clarity. Mornings began with light through the window and a cup of tea held with both hands. He listened more than he spoke. He noticed small things most people ignored. The way people carried stress in their shoulders. The way silence could say more than words. He worked, but not the way he once had. Now his work was about guidance. People came to him without knowing his full story. Some were young and uncertain. Others were older and tired. They spoke about mistakes, fear, and pressure to look successful. He listened carefully, never interrupting. When he spoke, he chose simple words. He told them that rushing to prove yourself is the fastest way to lose yourself. Some understood, some didn't. That was fine. Understanding has its own timing. One afternoon, he sat with a man who reminded him of his younger self. The man spoke about a big house he wanted to build, a name he wanted people to admire, and a fear of being forgotten. He listened patiently, then asked one quiet question. What happens if they stop watching? The man had no answer. He smiled gently. Not every lesson needs explanation. As the years passed, stories about the broken mansion faded further into the past. New stories replaced it. New successes. New failures. The world moved on as it always does, but sometimes late at night. He thought about the people who once laughed, not with anger, with understanding. He realized most people laugh because they are afraid of falling, afraid of being wrong, afraid of silence. He had lived through all three and survived. One evening, he received a letter from someone he didn't expect. It was not an apology, it was not a request. It was a simple thank you. The person wrote that his quiet help had saved their small business, that the patience he showed had changed how they viewed success, that they no longer felt ashamed of moving slowly. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. That meant more to him than any public praise ever could. The place he lived remained modest. He had more than enough, but he chose not to surround himself with excess. He had learned that too much comfort can make a person careless. He preferred awareness. Sometimes people asked why he didn't build another mansion. He smiled and said he already lived in the space he needed. They usually laughed. Thinking it was a joke, he let them. Laughter no longer bothered him. It no longer defined him. On a quiet morning, years after leaving the old town, he walked through a local market. A woman selling fruit looked at him for a moment, then asked a careful question. Did you ever lose something important? He thought before answering. Yes, he said, and I found something better in its place. She nodded, as if she understood exactly what he meant. That moment stayed with him. Loss had shaped him, but it had not emptied him. It had refined him as he aged. His pace slowed further. He chose rest without guilt. He chose peace without apology. He no longer needed to prove resilience. He embodied it. One night, sitting alone, he reflected on the journey. The mansion, the laughter, the silence, the patience, the quiet. Victory, none of it felt heavy anymore. It felt complete. He realized something then. The story was never about wealth revealed or pride restored. It was about becoming someone who could lose everything and still remain whole. That was the real success. When the world finally stopped expecting anything from him, he felt free. Free to live slowly. Free to choose silence. Free to walk away without explanation. And in that freedom, he found a kind of peace that no mansion, no approval, and no apology could ever give. The story did not end with applause. It ended with understanding, and that was more than enough. Life did not suddenly become exciting just because the past was settled. In many ways, it became quieter than ever. But this quiet was different. It was not empty. It was full. He woke up each day without the weight of proving anything. No one was waiting for him to fail anymore. No one was watching to see if he would rise again. That alone felt like freedom. He spent his mornings slowly, Sometimes he read. Sometimes he walked. Sometimes he simply sat and watched the light move across the floor. These moments would have once felt wasted to him. Now they felt necessary. People often misunderstand peace. They think it comes from success, or victory, or being proven right. He knew better. Peace came from accepting that most things do not need correction. Occasionally, people still reached out, not because they needed money, but because they needed clarity. They were tired, confused, stuck between who they were and who they felt pressured to be. He listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, he kept it simple. He told them that life becomes lighter when you stop carrying other people's expectations. Some nodded, some smiled, politely, and returned to their old habits. That was fine. Change cannot be forced. One afternoon, he visited a small place by the water. Nothing special. Just a quiet path and a few benches. He had been there before, but this time felt different. He sat down and watched the water move. He thought about the version of himself that once needed a mansion to feel secure. That man was not foolish. He was simply unaware. He believed strength had to be visible. Now he understood that true strength prefers privacy. As the day passed, he noticed how little he needed to feel content. A calm place. Time to think. The ability to leave when he wanted. That evening, he wrote something down. Not numbers. Not plans. Just a sentence. I am no longer afraid of being misunderstood. He closed the notebook and did not write again for days. Years moved forward quietly. He aged in a way that surprised people. Not because he looked younger, but because he looked settled. There was no rush in his movements, no tension in his voice. People asked him what his secret was. He said there was none. He had simply stopped running. One day, he heard a story that sounded familiar. Someone spoke about a man in another town who lived in a broken place. Ignored by everyone, quietly building something unseen. People laughed at that man too. He listened carefully. He did not interrupt when the story ended. He smiled to himself. Life repeats lessons for those willing to notice. He never reached out to that man. Some journeys must stay private. As time passed, the memory of the mansion faded even further. It became less of a place and more of a symbol. Something that belonged to a past version of him. He no longer introduced himself through what he had endured. He introduced himself through how he lived, now quietly, honestly, without defense. One evening, during a small gathering, someone asked him if he ever felt lonely. He thought carefully. Sometimes, he said, but not in a painful way. They didn't ask him to explain. That was enough. Loneliness, he had learned, is not the absence of people. It is the absence of understanding. And he finally understood himself. As the years continued, his involvement in the world grew smaller but deeper. He chose fewer connections, but more meaningful ones. He was present. He was attentive. He was free. The laughter that once followed, his name had long disappeared. Not replaced by praise, but by quiet respect, and eventually, by nothing at all. And that was the greatest gift. To live without being a story in someone else's mouth, to wake up without a role to play, to rest without guilt. In the end, the broken mansion was only a chapter. The real story was what came after. A life not built to impress. A life built to last. And that life, simple and unseen, was the one he chose every single day.